Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today we're doing a deep dive into Amanda Montell's really insightful book, Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism. And this exploration, it goes, way beyond the sensational headlines you might see about fringe groups.
Yeah, our core question is a lot more structural. You want to ask, what causes seemingly well-adjusted, normal people to join, and this is the critical part, to stay deeply invested in fanatical groups?
And that's regardless of how extreme or, frankly, how benign they might seem from the outside.
We're so conditioned to look for two things when we talk about cults, right? There's the charismatic, often manipulative leader, and then there's the remote, isolated compound. But Montell's core insight is that the most powerful mechanism, the one used to assert power to create that community, instill ideology, and inspire that intense loyalty.
Well, it had everything to do with one specific and I think often overlooked thing.
Language.
Language itself. Exactly. Language is the key means by which all of this cult-like influence happens. It empowers leaders to create this whole cohesive, totalizing mini-universe.
Right.
And Montell even cites a linguist who puts it very definitively. Without language, there are no beliefs, no ideology, no religion, and so no cults. It's like the blueprint and the architecture all in one.
So, just to be clear, we're not here for an expose. And we are definitely not here to judge anyone's intelligence.
No.
This is a systems-level analysis.
Yes.
We want to understand the systematic linguistic tools, things like conversion, conditioning, and coercion, that exploit our fundamental human needs for community and for meaning.
It's about how the system works on all of us, not about who to blame.
It's about mapping that blueprint. And once you start recognizing those patterns in the specialized vocabulary, the slogans, the exclusive terms,
You suddenly realize these mechanisms aren't just confined to some religious compound in the desert. They are operating in your office, at your gym, and all over your social media feed.
to guide us through this, we have Amanda Montell. She's a fantastic writer and a language scholar with a degree in linguistics from NYU, and she also wrote Wordslet.
And what's really compelling here is that her entry point into this research wasn't just, academic. It was deeply personal. It's rooted in her own family history.
Right, and her personal story is really the perfect setup for the book's entire argument about this spectrum of influence.
It really is. Her father, Craig Montell, had this really rigorous and traumatic adolescence. He was forced to join the Synanon Socialist Commune at age 14 back in 1969.
And Synanon wasn't just some casual group. It was highly controlling.
Oh, extremely. Kids lived in barracks, people were subjected to just severe social pressure, and lives were dictated entirely by the group.
And the most notorious method of control at Synanon was something they called, almost euphemistically, the game.
Yeah, the game. It was presented as this kind of hyper-aggressive group therapy. It would often last for hours, and peers would just engage in this vicious, unrestrained personal criticism.
It wasn't about healing at all.
No, not really. It was about social control. It was about breaking down the individual ego to ensure total commitment to the group.
And Montell's father survived this.
He did. He escaped at 17. And there's this fascinating paradox here because Synanon was, anti-intellectual, anti-individual,
Right.
but it paradoxically fostered his lifelong love of science because they made him run the commune's medical lab. That lab, with its empirical logic, became a sort of sanctuary for him from all that relentless linguistic and social pressure.
Wow, and that experience left him really sensitive to what we now call cultish language, right?
Exactly. All that exclusive, controlling jargon like being in the game or a love match for fixed relationship or that imperative to act as if, which just meant you never questioned anything.
But the crucial discovery from Montell herself, the thing that sparked the book, that didn't come until much, much later.
No, the realization that launched the book came when a college friend of hers got sober and started going to Alcoholics Anonymous, or AA.
Yeah.
And Montell was, of course, thrilled for her friend. But she said she immediately recognized the same kind of exclusive, intense linguistic system that she'd heard in her father's stories about Synanon.
That's fascinating. What were the specific terms that, that triggered that for her?
It was the immediate adoption of AA's lexicon. Words like HAA, which is an acronym for hungry, angry, lonely, tired. It's used as a warning against relapse triggers.
I've heard that one.
Or the term future trip, which means, stressing obsessively over what might happen in the future, or saying someone caught a resentment. They were all instantly recognizable as these linguistic stop signs, these psychological shorthands that defined the group's reality.
And that's so interesting because AA is a genuinely beneficial organization for millions of people. It provides structure, support.
Absolutely.
Yet it shared this key similarity with a really destructive commune like Synanon.
The creation of an exclusive linguistic system, and that is the core realization. Montell understood that cultish influence wasn't this all-or-nothing thing, restricted to isolated, robed, fringe groups.
It operates across the spectrum.
A vast, wide continuum of society. And the book investigates that whole spectrum from the historically destructive, like Jonestown, Heaven's Gate, 3HO, and Scientology.
All the way to groups that are secular and corporate.
And that's where the analysis becomes so relevant for everyone listening today. We're talking about high-intensity fitness communities like CrossFit and SoulCycle, consumer brands like Lululemon, MLMs like Mary Kay or Amway.
And startup culture, online communities like QAnon, it's everywhere.
To really bring the spectrum to life, Montell gives us two parallel stories that they're vastly different, but they really underscore her argument.
Okay, let's start with Tasha Samar and the 3HO organization.
Right. So Tasha Samar became deeply dedicated to 3HO. That's the Kundalini yoga group founded by Yogi Bhajan. She invested 8 years of her life, all her savings, her entire professional identity into the group.
She became a full-time instructor, right?
A very successful one, praised for attracting celebrity clients. She achieved that idealized identity, but the result for her was psychological abuse, financial loss, and just severe emotional trauma.
And the power of the group was maintained through these deeply installed fears.
I mean, we're talking about genuine psychological terror. Like the belief that if she committed an offense or failed to follow Yogi Bhajan's teachings, she would reincarnate as a cockroach.
Wow. That level of existential fear it's profoundly damaging.
Now, contrast that terrifying experience with the story of Alyssa Clark, the CrossFitter. Her devotion was just as intense, but it was focused on the physical.
Okay.
She became obsessed with the exclusive terminology. The gym is the box, the workout routine is the wood for workout of the day, all the specialized acronyms like BPs for bench press, BSs for back squats.
He was all in on the jargon.
Completely. And she was also caught up in the consumer side of it, spending hundreds on Lululemon, a brand that uses its own pseudo-philosophical, cult-like mantras on its shopping bags.
And her consequences.
A strained hamstring from overtraining, grossly overpriced leggings, and some codependent relationships within her box community.
So the stakes are profoundly different. Psychological ruin versus a sports injury and some debt.
Exactly. But Montell's central argument is that the underlying methods, the methods used to establish power, align values, create that us versus them identity, they were uncannily, cultishly similar. And they all centered on language.
So the problem isn't necessarily the groups themselves. It's this systematic, shared linguistic toolkit of fanaticism, which Montell calls cultish.
Yeah, it runs like a common thread through our society. And it forces us to stop analyzing the content of the belief and focus instead on the structure of the language.
It allows us to analyze the how without getting bogged down in the what.
Precisely. Language is the structural medium that allows these belief systems to be manufactured and reinforced. Without that specific controlled vocabulary, their fanaticism just couldn't exist in the same way.
Okay, that foundational idea is incredibly powerful. Let's move into the core ideas of the book, starting with what Montell says is the biggest conceptual hurdle preventing us from really understanding this.
And that hurdle is the persistent media notion of brainwashing or mind control. You hear it everywhere. They drank the Kool-Aid, or describing people as being mind-controlled.
It's the ultimate intellectual shortcut, isn't it? We use it to dismiss the followers as weak or stupid, and it just conveniently explains away why intelligent people do seemingly irrational things.
And Montell, along with other experts and even former cult recruiters, she denounces this term completely. She says it's pseudoscientific, it's entirely metaphoric, and worse, it's intellectually detrimental because it just stops analysis in its tracks.
Right. If you say someone is brainwashed, the conversation just ends there.
Exactly. You assign blame to some invisible force, and that's it. It infantilizes the victims, it disregards their ability to think for themselves, and it stops us from seeing the actual systematic process of influence at play.
And really, if true brainwashing were that effective, we would see far more dangerous, predictable schemes happening all over the world.
The reality is much more systemic and gradual. Cultish influence is achieved through these systematic techniques of conversion, conditioning, and coercion. And language is the primary tool. People are not helpless drones. They're influenced where they are already open to belief.
This connects to linguistic theory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The idea that language influences our thought, but it doesn't strictly control it.
Yes, it touches on the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The idea that the language we use shapes how we conceive of ideas. You can only successfully reshape someone's reality if that person is already, on some level, receptive to the new framework. The techniques work because they appeal to a deeper pre-existing hunger.
Which brings us right to the second key insight. This inherent human craving for structure and belonging, which these groups are expert at exploiting.
I mean, human beings are fundamentally social and spiritual creatures. We're driven by this deep desire for belonging and purpose. Neuroscientists even confirm this. Our brains are chemically rewarded during transcendent bonding rituals, whether it's group chanting, singing, or exercising in sync.
We get those hits of dopamine and oxytocin.
Our need for community is primal. It's ancient.
And the modern world seems almost uniquely designed to aggravate this need. Montell introduces a concept she calls the chooser's paradox.
Right. The paradox is that we live in a world of just overwhelming, endless choice. We face this Cheesecake Factory-sized menu of decisions about our career, our diet, politics, our identity.
And at the same time, there's this immense pressure, especially online, to synthesize all of those choices into a cohesive, monetizable personal brand.
That whole process of radical self-creation is paralyzing for a lot of people. It creates a kind of cognitive chaos. The market offers too many options, and the stakes for choosing the wrong thing feel, well, existential.
So the psychological response to that chaos is a deep craving for an identity template.
Exactly. People want a guru or a group that can just step in and tell them how to live. You don't have to figure it all out yourself. You can just ask, what would a CrossFit coach expect? Or what would my MLM upline recommend? This external structure just softens that crushing burden of self-determination.
And this need for structure is then amplified by this really primal human fear of alienation. We're just wired to fear being ostracized by the tribe.
Absolutely. Montell references the classic 1951 Ash conformity study. You might remember this one, where test subjects were asked to judge the length of lines on a card.
A simple visual task.
Very simple. But when they were placed with actors who all unanimously gave a blatantly wrong answer, a full 75% of the real subjects ignored what their eyes were telling them and agreed with the majority at least once.
They sacrificed objective reality for social reality.
Precisely. That compulsion to conform, that fear of being the one who's wrong or being ostracized by the group, that is what leaders exploit. If the group's narrative becomes your shield against the chaos of the outside world, you will cling to it even when the evidence clearly contradicts it.
Which leads directly to the third key idea. Language isn't just descriptive. It is a performative act that actively creates reality.
Let's spend a minute on this idea of performativity. It implies that speech itself has this intrinsic power to consummate an action.
Like a judge saying, I hereby sentence you. The words are the action.
Montell draws heavily on performativity theory. Religious language is the most intensely performative kind there is. Utterances like bless, curse, forgive, or vow, they aren't just words. They trigger significant, measurable, real-world consequences for believers.
So if you're repeatedly engaging in these collective rituals, prayers, chants, affirmations, the language sharpens your mental image of the spiritual authority.
Right. And over time, that authority solidifies. It starts to feel external and real, and eventually you might even feel that the authority is communicating back to you. The language literally conjures that ideological reality into existence.
But this powerful performative language needs boundaries to stay healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the concept of ritual time.
Exactly. In a healthy group, the special language and that intensity are confined to a specific time or domain, and it's signaled by symbolic actions.
Like lighting a candle before you meditate, or stepping onto a yoga mat, or even just clipping into your spin shoes.
Those are all symbolic actions that grant you temporary permission to suspend parts of your skepticism and enter that ritual space. But when you take the shoes off or blow out the candle, you go back to everyday reality and everyday language.
So the signature of a highly destructive controlling group is when they deliberately remove that boundary.
Yes. There's no going back to everyday reality. The special vocabulary, the jargon, the ideological demands, they hold almighty power all the time. In systems like Scientology, the intense jargon means members are perpetually trapped in that ritual time. They're unable to process experience outside the cult's linguistic framework.
That distinction seems like a really important line to draw. Which brings us to the fourth key insight, which is that cultish influence has to be viewed on a continuum, not a binary.
This is so crucial for avoiding that intellectual shortcut we talked about. We have to accept that fanatical devotion falls on a vast spectrum, from the relatively healthy, intense sports fans or dedicated music fandoms, all the way to the destructive, like Jonestown.
But if we acknowledge that, say, SoulCycle uses linguistic mechanisms that are similar to Scientology, aren't we in danger of trivializing the actual abuse and suicide that happened at Jonestown? Where does Montell say the ethical line is actually drawn?
That is the essential question. And the distinguishing factor, according to experts like Stephen Hassan, he's a mental health counselor and a former Mooney recruiter, is the degree of ethical transparency and honesty.
Okay.
Ethical groups are upfront about their beliefs, their expectations, their costs, and leaving them has few serious personal or financial consequences.
Right. If I stop going to CrossFit, my body might get weaker, but my coach isn't going to threaten me with eternal damnation or financial ruin.
Whereas destructive groups rely heavily on deception. They omit vital information, they distort facts, they tell outright lies, especially about the leader's history or finances. And crucially, they attach life-ruining fears to the act of leaving.
We're back to Tasha Samar and 3HO. That fear of reincarnating as a cockroach, that's the consequence of totalizing linguistic control. The goal is to make the consequences of leaving so much more terrifying than the consequences of staying, even if staying means poverty or abuse.
And that intense, irrational fear is manufactured by language. It takes a metaphorical concept like karma and makes it a literal present threat that dictates all your daily behavior. That's the sign that the language has become truly coercive.
Okay, let's move to the fifth core idea, which completely rejects the old notion that cult followers are inherently desperate or broken or low-intelligence individuals.
This is one of the most persistent myths out there. Prevailing wisdom suggests followers are weak-willed or stupid, but the research just doesn't support that.
Right.
Former recruiters like Stephen Hassan explicitly sought out candidates who were strong, caring, and motivated. They avoided wasting time on people who seemed likely to break down quickly.
The people they targeted were often highly intelligent, optimistic, energetic, the exact kind of people who would be effective workers, dedicated fundraisers, and charismatic recruiters themselves.
So the vulnerability isn't low intelligence. It's an overabundance of optimism and idealism combined with a strong investment in the group's promises to change the world. They're good-natured, service-minded, and they desperately want to believe that this system they've found is the answer.
And we see this historically in the case of Jonestown. Montell emphasizes that Black women perished there in disproportionate numbers. And this wasn't because they were somehow easier to coerce.
No, it was because Jim Jones successfully leveraged the promise of his progressive movement. He offered a rare opportunity for their voices to be heard, a political and social sanctuary that filled a void left by the slow pace of the civil rights movement and the exclusion they felt from white feminism.
They had so much idealism invested in the movement's stated goals, social justice, equality, that they just couldn't conceive that the leader and the organization were total frauds.
It was betrayed idealism. Their investment kept them compliant. They were trying to fulfill the noble goals the language promised.
Which brings us to the sixth key insight. The mechanism through which language exploits this idealism is the power of confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias is that ingrained human flaw to seek out and accept information that validates what we already believe, while we automatically ignore or filter out anything that contradicts it. We are all susceptible to this.
So how does cultish language leverage this psychological bias?
By being purposefully, strategically vague. Leaders use loaded language, euphemisms, amorphous acronyms, so that followers can essentially project whatever they want onto the language.
I see.
If the language is lofty and undefined, it acts like a mirror, reflecting the follower's own pre-existing hopes and desires. And that instantly filters out any of the off-putting or critical specifics.
It's like the horoscope effect applied to ideology. A vague statement about change or the deep state can be interpreted 100 different ways.
Exactly. It allows a diverse audience to find their own resonance, while the leader maintains structural control over the true, hidden meaning. For instance, a Jonestown survivor noted that when Jim Jones used jargon like white knight, followers interpreted it however they wished, maybe an evacuation drill, maybe a final gathering, conveniently neglecting the violent implication the term would eventually come to represent. The vagueness keeps the tent big enough for everyone.
Okay, so we've established the mechanism is linguistic control, and the vulnerability is our desire for structure. Now let's map this onto the structural system of the group itself, starting with the key actors and their roles.
At the top, you have the leaders, who are masters of what's called code switching.
Which is?
It's the fluid alteration of your dialect or your style to build social capital and trust. Jim Jones was the ultimate linguistic chameleon. He could appeal to upper-middle-class bohemians in San Francisco by dropping professorial references to Nietzsche.
And then, in the very next breath, he could pivot completely, addressing older Pentecostals with fire and brimstone Bible verses and the familiar, trusted intonation of a Southern reverend.
That versatility sent this immediate, powerful signal that he uniquely understood every single person in his audience. He built trust by reflecting their own linguistic style back at them.
And Montell points out that, sadly, the leader often benefits from a systemic societal bias, the voice of God phenomenon.
Yeah, this is a default vulnerability we have built into our perception. A deep, measured, confidently delivered standard English male voice just commands attention and trust by default in our culture.
It's a shortcut our brains take.
And it's exploited by leaders across the entire political and ideological spectrum.
Then you have the followers, who are motivated to adopt the specialized language instantly. Montell notes that adopting the language is the initial low-cost entry point.
It's commitment-free, right? It's much easier than shaving your head or moving to a commune in Guyana.
And this adoption quickly becomes a linguistic uniform. It signals allegiance and provides that identity template they're looking for.
And this is why oppressive groups insist on rituals like renaming members, like Tasha Samar becoming Daya Khalsa. It signifies shedding their former, questioning self and a complete linguistic submission to the new identity. The old self is literally named out of existence.
And that linguistic uniform, it sticks, even after someone leaves the group.
Oh, absolutely. We see it in former members still using the jargon years later. Frank Lyford, a Heaven's Gate survivor, still refers to the group as the classroom and their final collective suicide as leaving Earth. The language has become a foundational layer of his reality.
So for this cohesion to work, there's one final key actor.
Yeah.
The outsiders, or them.
Yes, the us versus them dichotomy is absolutely essential for gaining and maintaining power. Outsiders have to be defined as foolish or morally inferior or just hopelessly ignorant.
We see this everywhere, from Amway's JOB stereotype, the jackass of a boss, for anyone traditionally employed, to QAnon's labeling of outsiders as sheeple.
That language provides insulation. By defining the outside world as morally deficient, the follower is made to feel special, elect, in the know. This protects the group from any outside critique because any criticism is just instantly dismissed as coming from the jackasses or the sheeple.
So let's dig into the specific linguistic tools used for control, starting with loaded language and renaming.
Loaded language works by taking a word that already carries some emotional weight and twisting its meaning until its mere mention sparks an intense emotion, fear, dread, intense fervor among the insiders.
The example of 3HO twisting the phrase old soul is just chilling.
It really is. In everyday language, old soul is a compliment, right? It suggests wisdom, depth. But in 3HO, it became a phrase connoting dread. It meant someone was so flawed, so spiritually deficient, that they had been forced to reincarnate life after life and still couldn't get it right.
So the phrase became a threat of eternal spiritual failure.
Yes. And similarly, Jim Jones took the word accident and warped it. He taught that accidents are things that never happen unless we deserve them. When Jones said they must prevent accidents, the loaded charge for the insider was devastating. You must comply or you are inherently flawed, while an outsider just heard an innocuous statement about safety.
And this manipulation often goes hand in hand with thought-terminating clichés.
Right, a term coined by psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton. Montell calls them semantic stop signs.
These are those pithy, easily memorized catchphrases that are designed to just halt arguments, suppress critical thinking, and alleviate that uncomfortable cognitive dissonance. They're like psychological sedatives.
They compress these massive complex problems into definitive-sounding, easily repeatable phrases. Think of AA's first things first, or New Age dictates like, don't let yourself be ruled by fear. They sound wise, but they're designed to stop you from asking the next harder question.
QAnon's slogan, "Trust the Plan," functions exactly the same way. When followers are confronted with a failed prediction, that phrase shuts down rational thought instantly.
And you can hear this in the Jonestown death tape. When dissenters like Christine Miller tried to question the final act, Jim Jones used phrases like, "It's out of our hands." That's the ultimate semantic stop sign. If asking too many questions means you simply don't have the gift of recognition, like in Heaven's Gate, you quickly learn to stop questioning.
So it's a combination. Loaded language makes the body submit, and the cliché makes the brain quit.
And then you have the ultimate linguistic tool of oppression, which is particularly used in systems like Scientology, jargon and confusion, or what they call Hubbardese.
Right, the proprietary language.
L. Ron Hubbard created an entire linguistic system of thousands of invented terms and acronyms. AC for acknowledgement, COG for cognition, invented concepts like thetans and engrams.
And the crucial insight here is that this jargon isn't like technical language in a legitimate field, which is designed to make communication more precise.
No, in oppressive groups, it's designed to make communication less clear. It's meant to intentionally cause confusion and make followers feel perpetually intellectually deficient. The goal isn't to educate, it's to make them dependent.
So after 10 or 20 years, their vocabulary is just replaced by Hubbardese.
Exactly. Which makes it impossible for outsiders to understand them, driving isolation, and it forces insiders to depend wholly on the leader for truth.
And this intentional confusion leads directly to the feedback loop of gaslighting, using language to manipulate followers into doubting their own reality.
The ultimate exhausting example of this is Scientology's word-clearing process. The doctrine insists that if you struggle to grasp a concept, or if you disagree with a policy, it's not because the concept is flawed, it's simply because you have a misunderstood word, or an MU.
And the process of fixing this misunderstanding is what's truly paralyzing.
It is brutally efficient. Word clearing requires the follower to look up every single MU in the approved texts. If the definition of that word contains new MUs, well, you have to look those up too.
So you get stuck in this dreaded, endless word chain.
You could be stuck on a single word for hours. You might even be required to perform physical demonstrations of the definition, like sculpting a concept in Play-Doh to prove you understand it.
That just sounds like an engineered state of perpetual exhaustion.
It is psychological manipulation as systemic policy. If a follower disagrees with something they read, they aren't allowed to argue ideology. They're instantly accused of having MUs and sent back to word clearing. This constant state of confusion just forces compliance. At a certain point, you just give up. You choose agreement simply to escape the paralyzing process.
It's an ingenious system for narrowing perception until only the approved reality remains.
And these mechanisms, they aren't just historical curiosities. They are functioning right now, today, in contexts far removed from compounds and robes.
Right. Let's bring these systems mapping tools into the present day, starting with corporate culture.
Modern companies, often advised by consultants, they actively aim for a cult-like company culture. They want to secure those fiercely loyal employees and repeat customers.
And this ambition gives rise to what's been called garbage language, that hollow workplace gibberish that sounds important but means absolutely nothing.
We've all heard it. Synergy, whiteboarding, move the needle, thought leadership, and the ironic directive to get everyone drinking the Kool-Aid. The excessive use of this garbage language is a massive red flag because it signals conformity.
And in competitive startups, you get this mix of woo-woo metaphors like calling a team a family and meaningless jargon that takes advantage of employees' idealism and their eagerness to achieve.
A business scholar, Manfred Ketz de Vries, warns that this widespread dialect suppresses individuality. If everyone is forced to speak using the company's empty vocabulary, they stop thinking critically about the company's operations or the leader's decisions.
It creates an echo chamber. Top management is constantly surrounded by people using their specific approved dialect. They only hear what they want to hear.
And in that environment, the leader's personal madness becomes institutionalized very quickly. The language system reinforces capitalist ideals of productivity and relentless optimism, often deliberately, to maintain a power imbalance where questioning the mission is linguistically impossible.
Another prime example Montell dissects is the multi-level marketing industry. She calls it the uncanny love child of Protestantism, capitalism, and corporatization.
MLMs like Mary Kay and Amway recruit using intensely emotionally charged and grandiose language. They promise an amazing opportunity to swim in cash if you just follow the system. And this is layered with quasi-religious rhetoric like Mary Kay Ash's famous tagline, God first, family second, Mary Kay third.
And they immediately implement that us versus them verbiage to bond followers and frame them as morally superior to anyone with a traditional job.
Yes. If you work for an employer, you have a job, a jackass of a boss. You're a slave. The MLM language positions the recruit as a courageous boss babe who has seized control of their destiny. This hyper-positive language forces them into a perpetual ritual time of positive selling behavior, even on social media.
And crucially, the system encourages isolation from critical thought. Recruits are told to snip out friends or family who express doubt, labeling them haters or dream killers.
This isolation maintains the illusion. Followers ignore the math that over 99% of people in MLMs lose money because the rhetoric is so powerful. They are selling a system, and that desire to embody the boss babe identity keeps them trapped.
And finally, we have to look at the digital landscape. The internet provides the perfect platform for online and digital cultish groups like QAnon and the broader conspirituality movement to flourish.
The internet has replaced the remote commune. These groups leverage the same linguistic tactics. They use vague, lofty buzzwords, deep state, global cabal, paradigm shift, like a horoscope.
That's the confirmation bias in action. The generic posts let people project whatever anxieties or hopes resonate with them, camouflaging the fact that a unified belief system doesn't actually exist.
And when they're threatened, they deploy that classic cultish linguistic defense. QAnon uses a complex, exclusive jargon of acronyms and co-ops, innocent-sounding phrases like #SaveTheChildren to evade social media algorithms and hide in plain sight.
This digital exclusivity, often enforced by posting only in ephemeral stories or encrypted chats, reinforces that sense that they are the elect truth seekers with special forbidden knowledge.
While everyone else is just a sheeple, and when they're confronted with reality, they resort to the semantic stop signs, trust the plan, or the incredibly dangerous directive to do your research.
Where doing research means just falling further down the confirmation bias rabbit hole.
Exactly. Clicking only on links provided by the group and ensuring total adherence to the group's dictated reality.
So why are some people more susceptible to these linguistic systems than others?
Well, Montell suggests it relates to how our brains process information, referencing Daniel Kahneman's concept of two systems. System one is quick, intuitive, emotional, automatic. It relies on anecdote and is highly susceptible to catchy language.
And system two is the opposite. Slow, careful, skeptical, analytical. The system we use when we check the math.
And research suggests that when we're in a good mood or when we are intensely idealistic and optimistic, we're naturally more inclined to use system one thinking. We're trusting, unsuspecting.
While being in a bad mood can actually activate system two.
Yes, that and higher education, scientific training, they can make people better at sensing deception. So the intellectually sharp and highly optimistic person, the ideal target for recruiters, is often willing to suspend disbelief and rely on System 1, that gut feeling of this feels right in a situation that demands intense System 2 analysis. They are cognitively primed to trust the promise of the language.
When we step back and look at these broader themes, it becomes clear that the word cult itself is not just a subjective judgment. It carries real life or death consequences within our societal and legal systems.
This is a powerful political realization. Once the press or institutions apply the label cult, it can function as a kind of linguistic death sentence, stripping a group of its humanity and its constitutional rights.
Absolutely. Once the media labeled the Jonestown victims as cultists, they were instantly dehumanized in the public mind. They were denied post-mortem respect and just widely dismissed as gullible.
The language allowed the world to shrug off the tragedy as an anomaly rather than a systemic failure of idealism.
And the ultimate violent example of this linguistic labeling is the 1993 FBI siege of the Branch Davidians in Waco. That attack was legally sanctioned and socially condoned specifically because the Davidians were labeled a cult and placed outside the constitutional protection that's afforded to a recognized religion.
The authorities, driven by this media-fueled fear of another Jonestown, felt justified in using extreme violence that resulted in the deaths of nearly 80 people. The word cult created a political and social category that just authorized violence and removed due process.
This highlights the systemic bias in what we call cultural normativity. Religion scholar Reza Aslan famously observed the pattern. Cult plus time is religion.
So many major, long-standing denominations in the U.S., including Mormons, Baptists, Quakers, they were all once considered dangerous cults by the mainstream.
So it's cultural normativity, not the inherent weirdness of the teachings, that determines legitimacy.
Yes. When a group achieves the status of a recognized religion, it gains constitutional protection and profound social respect. The language of the powerful defines what is acceptable devotion and what is dangerous fanaticism.
And Montell connects this back to how cultish language reinforces existing, often oppressive, power structures. She knows how the language of cult fitness cleanse, purified, discipline, has these clear biblical or evangelical undertones.
And that's significant because that language repackages devotion and submission in a palatable modern way, but with the added chaser of capitalist ambition. You aren't just purifying your soul, you're perfecting your personal brand, maximizing productivity and conforming to normative beauty standards.
So the core tension the book leads us with is balancing that innate psychological need to belong with maintaining our critical skepticism.
And the book's final advice is not to become a misanthrope or isolate yourself. You can engage with these cultish systems, fitness brands, political movements, and even use their rhetoric. But you must consciously maintain a vigilant twinkle in your eye.
That twinkle is the constant reminder that there's a degree of metaphor and make-believe here, and that the language is a tool being used for influence.
You have to ensure that your fundamental identity comes from an amalgam of influences, from a complex synthesis of different groups and ideas, not from one single totalizing system.
The test is simple.
It is. If you can consciously strip off the group's linguistic uniform when you close the app or leave the studio and start speaking like yourself again, then you are not all in. And that is the space where belonging and skepticism can successfully coexist.
This has been a remarkable deep dive. I think we are decisively leaving behind that simplistic brainwashing narrative and replacing it with a more rigorous understanding of fanaticism as a system of linguistic control.
A system that exploits our deepest human needs for connection, structure, and purpose in this chaotic, choice-overloaded world.
We've mapped how loaded language, thought-terminating clichés, and exclusive jargon function identically across the entire spectrum, from destructive groups like Jonestown to commonplace corporate movements.
And the importance of this awareness, I think, it really can't be overstated. We have to recognize when language cues an instant, powerful emotional response, a sense of belonging or fear, while at the same time it's halting all further questions.
And when rhetoric morally divorces us from one-dimensionally inferior outsiders, that is the language of control, and it must be challenged.
And that challenge, it starts with our own narration.
So what's the final provocative thought that Montell leaves us with to carry forward?
Montell suggests that maybe the healthiest way to meet our profound need for belonging in this modern era is to become a part of several cults at once. By diversifying our allegiances, being a devoted reader, a committed employee, a regular at a fitness studio, a fan of a sports team, we prevent any single system from becoming totalizing. The most fulfilling life, she suggests, is one that you narrate yourself, using language as a material to construct your reality, rather than having it dictated to you by a single guru.
We deeply thank Amanda Montell for her insightful work, Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism.
We encourage you to read the book yourself. If you found the ideas valuable, please consider supporting the author by purchasing her work or check your local library for free access.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis and Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.